Flo, did you just say that you watched Justice League, all 4 hours of the Snyder cut of Justice League?
I absolutely did. I did watch Justice League. The first part is like, I thought it was just going to be an extended cut, right? And it was not an extended cut. That is an entirely different movie. Like,
I have a question.
Sure, please.
Did you say 4 hours?
Yes.
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 It is a 4-hour movie.
4-hour film?
Yes. And it's a bad movie, too. It's not a fun 4 hours.
Well, I don't think it was terrible. What I think was awful was the first Justice League. And I thought we were just going to get more piled on top of the first Justice League. But instead, they basically, in the cut we saw in the movie theater, cut out all of the people of color, which were the only heart and soul of the entire film, and would have actually made for a much better film. And they showed us a hot piling steam of trash several years ago. And I was like, this movie wasn't terrible. It's too long, sure, for like a feature-length film, but I was watching it home.
Dave,
yes, David.
Dave,
Thank
you have
you.
a question.
Yes. Follow up to Shannon's question. What is a Justice League?
So Justice League, so you know how we have
It's
the
like
Marvel,
the shitty Avengers.
What are the Avengers?
Marvel fan here, and that's the problem. Okay,
How much
so
time do we have tonight?
I feel like you can like both, but there's DC and then there's Marvel Comics.
I would like both if they both were good.
And Marvel, and so we have watched Marvel create the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? Which are all of these movies
MCU
that are linked together,
alert.
known as the MCU, right? Did I say MCU?
Is it
No, but I
known as
wanted to say it.
Is it known as the MCU to many people?
Yes, it's known as the MCU to people who watch these movies, but to people who don't, those letters don't make any sense, right?
I made that up. Yeah.
It's known as the MCU, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and there are a series of movies that are all tied together over the course of like a decade and a half of movies that came out, or almost 2 decades.
Right. I remember these.
That have come out, right?
Mhm.
And so these are your Iron Man, your Captain America, your Black Panther, your Doctor Strange, your Spider-Man,
Thor,
your, right?
Thanos.
Like Thor. Yeah, I was gonna say all of those, right? And so those are all your characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and all of the movies kind of tie into one another, but they all exist in the same universe. So DC Comics also have their own universe, and
the DCEU, which is the Detective Comics extended universe.
The European universe.
The European universe.
Oh,
right.
the European Union.
And so within DC Comics, that's where you have your Superman, your Wonder Woman, your Flash, your Batman, right? They all exist in the same universe, okay?
Okay.
Aquaman, right? They're all in the same universe.
To my memory, the only good one was the first Wonder Woman, or are there other good movies?
So there are some in there, but that's where this gets murky, right? Because
this is a can. You opened a can. Kempa opened a can.
Did I do it bad? Is this going to be an entire episode about this?
No, it's not. But this is where it gets murky, right? Because technically all the things that happen with those characters exist in that universe. So like that also means like the Nolan Brothers trilogy is in that universe. And I would argue
the Nolan trilogy does not have anything to do with that universe. That's a completely different interpretation of Batman.
I totally know what you both are talking about.
Ben Affleck is the Batman of this one.
Ben Affleck is the Batman in this current universe. But what I'm saying
he's my Batman of my universe. If we're doing
DC versus Marvel,
he's the thick Batman.
Marvel has to own all of those really shitty Hulk movies, and DC also gets to have Batman. Like that's how this works, right? It's Marvel and it's DC. And so yes, there is an iteration of it that has been made to link together, but also you get credit for all of the movies in your universe. So
which in Marvel sucks, right? Because they used to make really bad movies.
Right.
And now they make good movies. And so when people are like, oh, but what about that Ang Lee Hulk movie? It's like, no, that's a different thing. That's from before we started doing it good. But in DC, it's reversed.
The gay cowboy movie?
Yes, Ang Lee did Brokeback Mountain and the first Hulk with Eric Bana.
Yeah.
So in DC, though, it's reversed because Christopher Nolan actually did a fairly decent trilogy of Batman movies. Right. And then as soon as he was done, they just started making terrible movies only.
I do remember those Batman movies. I liked them.
They're good. They're good. Those are good movies.
So so that has been the challenge. So they put together this Justice League movie that Tareen will tell you I didn't even remember watching. That's how much of a trauma it was and how much I had blocked it out. So and it wasn't until we were like part of the way through the movie where I was like, maybe I've seen some of this before. And Tareen was like, yes, we saw, but then it really wasn't. They completely deviated from the script that we saw. And at the time they said that they went back and reshot things to give the movie more heart, but everybody hated the movie. And then what it turns out is that they basically cut all of the like the threads that had some of your more prominent people of color. And
well, you know the story of why this happens, right? The behind the scenes version of what happens here. Zack Snyder, who just put out his extended cut that we started this conversation talking about, he started making this movie. He's the same guy who made Man of Steel. He made the Batman versus Superman movies. So he's coming in to make his Justice League. Well, during production of this movie, he had a family tragedy and his daughter died. So he left the set of the movie mid-production to go like be a dad and grieve. And the studio brought Joss Whedon in, who was like, oh, I hate what Snyder is doing. I'm going to do something completely different with it, and just like mixed up the pot. And that was the first version that we got, was the Joss Whedon version.
Like you guys are all doing like totally cultural references, but I got that one. Joss Whedon is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who ended up being a terrible misogynist.
He's a terrible man. Yes,
would not surprise me if he's also a racist who cuts out all of the reason plot points.
Well, that's part of the reason why all the very first film for Wonder Woman was like really well done, and in fact, women commented on the thigh jiggle, which again, Tareen and I, when we talked about this, he was like, I don't know why there's so many articles written about the thigh jiggle. I didn't know that was a thing. But like, it's essentially like when Wonder Woman lands, her thigh jiggles a little bit. And it's something that you almost never see in movies. But like, this is a powerful, strong woman. And that's how physics works, right? Then we fast forward to the Justice League, who has this very sexist director, and all the shots are up her ass. So like, we get so many ass shots of Gal Gadot for no freaking reason. It's just like, she's walking up. Why not take the perspective of her ass to head ratio being like 12-1, right? Like, it's like constant throughout the movie that people marveled at just how bad the like cinematography was, and how it was definitely written from like a straight dude who has a crush perspective.
A straight dude who's sort of like ass level
and is a little bit pervy, like like that's how. And so then this one has a different perspective. It has all these different lines coming into it. You know, the cyborg story is much more prominently told. You actually get to know his family. Be the whole episode.
He's the
it's amazing. It's amazing in how distinct it is. I won't say it's a perfect movie. It's not Marvel, but it is amazing how different. You won't say it's a perfect
movie?
I'm just gonna sketch Gal Gadot's ass.
That's like getting in like a 20-car pileup accident and being like, listen, I won't say this was a perfect afternoon. But it was quite good. I enjoyed almost all of it.
I didn't think it was bad. And I don't know if that's just by comparison or just what, but like, I really did not think it was a bad storyline.
The whole first like 2 hours of the movie is just slow-mo shots of people doing like striking poses while like sad girl music plays for no reason. They do that like 100 times. Batman doesn't show up in costume for 2 hours.
What? Thank you, Dave, for that rendering of Gal Gadot's ass.
You're welcome.
We so appreciate it.
Okay, you know what? Maybe this is a Patreon episode because we actually have to do like a real version of the show. But I want to come and throw down with Flo on the Justice League at some point.
that could be a special episode.
I just want to sit in the back
this was a bad movie.
Drink some wine.
I stand by that. I do not think this is a bad movie.
And I
disagree strongly.
Incorporate my art throughout their special episode.
That's great.
I mean, as long as
somebody says there is a line in this movie where the bad guy, who's like this cosmic monster who like just wants to kill the world for no reason, is like, you have been near the mother box. I can smell its scent upon you.
Oh dear.
Yes, he says it twice. Two times the same line comes up by like this fucking flavor. Cosmic monster with a shark head.
The mother box.
Okay, but the mother box is a thing. Whatever. As long like if you're not gonna watch it with like a 12-year-old perspective of like, oh, he said box, I can smell it on you.
Dude, he says mother box like 1,000 times. What perspective am I supposed to have on this?
I kind of want to watch it in that perspective.
I literally did not think about that until you just said it. But
okay, you didn't think about it when he described the scent of the mother box.
Yeah, we are now 10 minutes into our intro and we've got a full episode.
Fine.
All right. We definitely have to do a full special episode on this, though.
Hell yeah. Let's bring in a guest and go to town.
Kempa and I will be your guest.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't know what the MCU is. I don't think you get to be our guest.
That's
Voices.
True. Let's start the fucking show.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And you have Skyler.
And you have Shannon.
And Flo.
Our first Tuesday with Flo back in, oh God, it's been like 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's been a couple Tuesdays.
Yeah.
Back.
Also, every time we say Tuesday, we're recording on a Monday and it freaks me out.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's fine because you're going to
have to get used to that part of the podcast life, Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It's gonna help me out when it is Tuesday when I'm in Europe recording, and you're all here on Monday.
And we're like, Kempa, it's fucking Monday.
Mm-hmm. Also, let's try not to swear on our Tuesday episode, Shannon.
Yes, please.
Apologize to Mickey.
I'm sorry that I say so many swears.
I didn't give the warning to the host before we recorded, so
let's be honest.
We got too worked up about Batman.
But let's get started because we had a very spirited intro that required some time. But now that we're all here, let's just begin. Let's get right into it. Flo. Yes. Now that the doctor is back, the doctor is in. Can we talk a little bit about what it means that now, we've got a few million vaccinations under California's belt? The state itself is down to, on a given day, anywhere between 2,000 and 3,500 new cases a day, which is nowhere near as much as it was, the last few months.
Right.
Things are cleaning up a bit. Newsom, the governor, is obviously opening some things up. So obviously people are saying that it might be in relation to his recall bid. What's going on? Who do we trust? Should I still be hiding in my home? Am I allowed to do things?
So, yeah. You should be hiding in your home. And we really should be continuing the same precautions we were using before. The reason that I say that is because there are like mathematical predictions of if we continue the most restrictive of our protections in place until mid to late June, we actually have the ability to potentially have enough people vaccinated that we won't have another peak happen again. And so that's really important. So yes, while we are being downgraded because there are tiers to this, and so purple is the worst tier. The color actually operates sort of in the same vein as the air quality, except they don't have green. So purple is the worst, followed by red, and then orange, and then yellow. And so we moved from purple, which is widespread, into the red, which is substantial. And so that means that some of the non-essential, businesses are being given a little more latitude, and some of them are actually able to reopen, whereas before most of them were not able to be open at all. So that's a major difference, and so that will. And that's
not just our county that's in red. It is now fully so many counties that it makes up 87.7% of the state that are in the red tier. Sorry, keep going.
That's correct.
Is anyone still in purple?
Yeah,
there are a few.
Yeah, a lot of Central Valley counties actually.
Gotcha.
Yep. So most of the state is being downgraded, and then we have a few places. We actually have one, I think it's Alpine, if I'm recalling correctly, that's in minimal, but and then I think there are like 3 counties that might be in orange. 3 or 4,
Plumas,
something like that.
Sierra County, Mariposa, and actually now San Mateo as well. And then you were correct about Alpine being yellow.
Yeah. Alpine's my favorite county, by the way. I didn't know if that's a thing people do, but I have a favorite county. It's Alpine. It's the smallest county in California. It only has 1,200 people, has about 8 births a year, and it's my favorite place. I find it so intriguing.
That's adorable.
I do not have a favorite county.
I've never thought about
outside of Sacramento, obviously. Sacramento, but like outside of Sacramento, Alpine's my fave. So we're in this weird place where we are improving in terms of numbers, and we are getting more and more people vaccinated every week. And yet we do need to continue to do what we've done for a while to make sure that the gains we're seeing hold.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worried that people are going to prematurely go out. I'm worried that people who are only half vaccinated or aren't fully vaccinated because they've gotten the 1 dose, but it hasn't been 28 days, are going to start to engage not just in some of the activities that are allowed for vaccinated people, but also some of the activities that still are not suggested. And the CDC has been pretty clear that, like, if there are a group of vaccinated people, fully vaccinated, there are some things that you can begin to do and like gather in small groups of just vaccinated people alone indoors and those kinds of things. But that needs to happen. You can't have mixed groups. It can't be, Shannon's vaccinated and Skyler is vaccinated, but Flo and Dave aren't, so we're all going to hang out inside. It needs to be everybody is fully vaccinated. And it can't be like, I got my second shot yesterday, so we're here, or I got my Johnson & Johnson a week ago, so we're here. It needs to be like, you've been vaccinated and waited the allotted time for your immune system to build up the antibodies before you're considered fully vaccinated. And so those are some of the things that we're concerned about.
Let's walk through that a little bit. So the state, according to California's website, covid19.ca.gov, 14.8 million vaccines have been administered. Now, this isn't 14.8 million people necessarily, because this could be folks who are half vaccinated through the Moderna and Pfizer, or folks who are vaccinated through the Johnson & Johnson, which only requires 1. So it tells us that there are 14.8 million people vaccinated or vaccines administered, but we don't know exactly how many people or how far along they are. The CDC, I believe, has been saying that to be fully vaccinated, you have to be 2 weeks removed from your final vaccination.
Correct.
So 2 weeks removed from your Johnson & Johnson single vax, or 2 weeks after your second vaccination from Moderna and Pfizer, right?
So my understanding for Johnson & Johnson is that it's supposed to be 4 weeks after that one.
Okay.
It's considered to be 28 days, I thought it was.
I don't know the details of it. I thought I read at Washington Post 2 weeks, but I can look that up.
It says 2 weeks on the CDC.
Yeah, I was gonna say I could also be mixing it up with how they evaluated. I know Johnson & Johnson at a longer time frame, and so maybe I'm thinking of that. But I do know it's 2 weeks after the other 2.
Okay, on the study for Johnson & Johnson, I know that like on the trials that they tested they checked with folks 2 weeks in and then 4 weeks in, but I'm not sure if that changes anything. Yeah.
We need to get this right, because there's a lot of people who are listening to this at the Zebra Club right now who need to know the answer to this.
The CDC says more than 2 weeks after the Johnson & Johnson one, so we can go with their recommendation. I know because it's similar for like Pfizer and Moderna. The endpoints for each of those were different in the trials. So one of them looked at 7 days after the second dose. The other looked at 14, but the recommendation is 14 days after the second dose.
Okay.
So I think that's how they're doing it to keep it consistent.
Which, by the way, like they're also, this is all, and even the CDC says it in their recommendations. This is current. This is our most recent recommendations, and this is subject to change. We've never dealt with this before, right?
Yeah. Yep. And part of the reason for this, part of the reason why there's a little bit of confusion sometimes is because like, I know, because I'm most familiar because obviously they've been out the longest, and the Johnson & Johnson data just came out a couple of weeks ago. So we're talking like, I think we're at 2 weeks now that it's even been out and available. Right. But Pfizer and Moderna, they also looked at how, like what level of protection was conferred even after the first dose. And so it was usually around 10 days after the first dose that you saw an inflection point where you were more protected than the people who had not been vaccinated at all. And so that's probably where the 2 weeks is coming in for after that dose, because that's around the time when you've built up enough antibodies to be able to see a real difference between people who haven't been immunized.
Okay.
I have a question about, so I've been seeing some, and I don't know, I might be interrupting a train of thought here, Kempa, so I'm sorry if I am, or line of questioning, whatever we want to call it. I've been seeing a lot of discussion on the internet. Don't know if you've heard of it, the social medias, talking about what happens for people, speculating around like, what happens if you are in like a mixed group of people, like you say you've got pals that have decided not to get vaccinated. What is standard operating procedure moving forward once people who are vaccinated are into their 2+ weeks, and we are potentially into July, let's say, when things are maybe a little bit more when it's easier to gather in spaces because our vaccination rates are up higher. Like, what is I'm asking like, what's the risk? There's people who are saying like the risk is 100%, like the people who aren't vaccinated are screwed, or I guess I don't need to clarify. You have a PhD. You understand what I'm asking you?
Yes, I think I know what you're asking me. So basically, once we get right now, the risk is still pretty high in terms of you getting COVID, by being, unprotected and exposed, right? Which is why we haven't completely opened everything up, and, why that would be ill-advised. The question is, if we continue on the route we're on and possibly even scale up vaccine availability, what about those people who aren't vaccinated in July, right? That's essentially your question. Like, what's their risk?
The people who aren't vaccinated in July, and what if you have people in your circles that choose not to be vaccinated?
Yeah, because by then,
my opinion about that.
By then they should have had every chance to be vaccinated.
Right. So the current guidance is, and this is where we'll see how the guidance turns into people's, behavior, right? But the guidance right now is that if you have a low risk family that hasn't been vaccinated and you have been vaccinated, you can spend time with one household. But you shouldn't be mixing households. That's why I use the example of pretending Dave and I hadn't been vaccinated and Skyler and Shannon had. We should not be getting together. But if Skyler and Shannon, having been vaccinated, wanted to hang out with Dave, who hadn't been vaccinated, let's say, They could, right? Because he's one household and he's relatively low risk. And they do emphasize the low risk, right? Likely somebody who's working from home, who doesn't have a lot of exposures. Like you don't want to, to be hanging out with somebody who's unvaccinated who has a high level of exposure, because you're essentially testing your vaccine every time you do. And there is something called vaccine failure. What that means is that Pfizer and Moderna, for example, have a 95% efficacy. And that means that, about 5% of cases, you're exposed, you're fully vaccinated, and for whatever reason, you get sick. And so it's important for us to recognize that part of the reason why we talk about herd immunity is because that 5% becomes even lower the more people are vaccinated, because it basically means that there's just less of the virus moving through the population. So even if you are one of those people who maybe would have had a vaccine failure, you're less likely to have it because your vaccine is not being constantly tested. So that's also one thing.
There is a little bit of evidence that some of the newer, more robust strains are a little bit more effective against the Moderna and Pfizer, right?
Right. Yes. And so the other part of this is that the virus does mutate. And so we are learning over time how much it's being protected, how much, you can be protected from the new strains by the vaccine. Johnson & Johnson was tested, because it came out a little later, it was tested while the South African variant and the California variant were moving around, as well as the Brazilian variant, right? So like it was tested in South America and South Africa and in the United States. And so, and it was tested also when the caseload was much, much, much higher, like 4 to 5 times higher than it was when Pfizer and Moderna were being tested. So we do have a little more data about, its ability to be able to confer some protection against those additional variants. But that's something that we're going to be keeping an eye on, is as new variants come out, are the vaccines able to provide protection? To what extent? And of course, the question that remains for everybody is, how long will your immunity last? Will we need additional booster shots? Johnson & Johnson is currently looking into, I think, 2 new vaccine dosage that they're experimenting around with. One would be splitting their current dosage in 2 and actually making it 2 doses. So it'd be a lower concentration of the vaccine you're getting now, but twice. And another one is having a longer period of time than what Pfizer and Moderna use, but to get a booster shot. And so they're going to be looking at that as we go into the summer, and they're experimenting with that right now. So there's a lot we're still learning about these vaccines, including how long you're protected.
Okay. I want to drive home one more thing, and then just like kind of reiterate for the listeners before we move on to the next topic. Once more, all 3 vaccinations, to our knowledge, what we've seen from the studies are, they may have, the possibility of you can still contract COVID even after you're vaccinated, but they are 100% effective, to our knowledge, against cases so severe that you need to end up in the hospital or in an ICU, and 100% effective against death, again, to our knowledge so far, right?
So far, I don't know if it's 100%, but it's close to. But yeah, that's the main selling point for them, is that even if you do get sick, you won't get nearly as sick as other people who are unvaccinated, which is the entire point.
Right. Yeah. Getting the flu sucks, but you got the flu and then you get over it often if you're, a person with a generally robust immune system. The next thing before we move on to the next topic is just to reiterate to folks, you're fully vaccinated. What are you allowed to do once more? It's you can hang out with other fully vaccinated
indoors with other fully vaccinated people, or with one household that is not fully vaccinated. But you should not hang out with but are low risk.
Risk, yeah.
Right. You should not be hanging out with multiple unvaccinated households.
Okay.
Indoors, especially.
And folks, please do keep looking up when your turn is, myturn.ca.gov, and look into that. The tiers should be dropping soon, which means that your turn might be coming up next.
Yeah, we're ahead of schedule, correct?
We are ahead of schedule and moving through the tiers. We're not ahead of schedule in terms of moving through the number of people vaccinated, because there are 40 million people in California. Some of them are under the age of 16, which means they don't have any eligibility right now for any of the vaccines.
Gotcha.
They are testing vaccines right now in populations 12 to 18. And I never remember which one it is. I think it's either Pfizer or Moderna is available to people 16 and 17 right now. But that's as low as they go. The youngest age right now that can be vaccinated is 16.
Gotcha.
And the hope is that if there are promising data, that number will continue to drop so that more people under the age of 18 can also be vaccinated.
Cool. Any other questions for the doctor before we move on?
No, I'm good. I want to get done with this show so I can get to the bar. So
Okay.
let's keep it moving here.
Off to Zebra. Yeah, we're gonna do our post-show Zebra meetup. Folks, don't go to Zebra Club.
Please don't. Please stay home. Just make it. Can we get to July?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you listeners or you hosts know, but in February of this year, Voices River City posted really an earth-shattering opinion piece.
It will rock your world.
It will blow your mind whole, rock your world whole, and any other? No? Okay. A fantastic.
Stop talking about holes.
Sorry. It's just a thing I got.
It'll rock your mother box.
I hate you all. I hate all of you.
Oh,
Also, I did not think about mother boxes like that, and I really don't appreciate Skyler.
How did you not?
Exactly.
Anyway.
Thank you.
We're talking about something else now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The scent of a mother box. I have.
Well,
Now I might have to sit
You have to
through
watch
4
the
hours
movie.
of whatever this is.
I
that
promise
still
you don't
fully
have to do that.
understand.
Someone is-
Anyway,
It's really not that bad.
Skyler wrote a piece back in February titled "Democrats Must Govern Boldly If They Want to Defeat Trumpism." And I think a number of listeners and viewers know that Skyler pays a good amount of attention to national level politics, and probably more so than the rest of us on here. So I thought it would be fantastic if you could kind of expound on this argument that you made in this piece. First, can you tell us what the central argument is and was, and we'll go from there.
Yes, absolutely. So my central argument is that if Democrats really are serious about maintaining the House and the Senate and the power that they need in order to affect change and improve the conditions of the country, they're going to have to get off their asses and actually start doing things that matter, right? And if they don't, then they are in danger of losing the House and the Senate. And that, of course, that we know, everybody knows, regardless of whether you follow politics or not, that if Mitch McConnell is the Senate Majority Leader, then we're just gridlocked all the time, right? Everybody knows. So it is imperative upon the Democrats, if they don't want that to happen, to do things that will energize voters and turn them out during the midterms, which are this year, by the way. And our people typically don't turn out and vote in them because people are so disenfranchised by politics that unless it's like the looming threat of Donald Trump is there, nobody comes to the polls, right? So I know that a lot of people kind of get like, I feel like a lot of people get tired of leftists being like, if Joe Biden doesn't fight for minimum wage, he's going to lose the House and the Senate or whatever, right? But I don't think that a lot of people know that so Joe Biden is the third Democratic president elected in about 30 years. Yeah, we've got
Since Bill.
Bill is the first. Bill wins his election in 92.
'92.
Bill comes in. So I'm going to come back to Bill in a second. Bill comes into office with the Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate, right?
Folks, Bill being William Jefferson Clinton.
Yes.
Sorry.
The 40-something president or whatever. I don't
From
even
Arkansas.
know. Yeah, whatever. Some asshole. So he...
42nd?
Was he?
42nd?
Yeah, maybe.
Because Bush is 43 and then Obama's 44.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That tracks.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think that that sounds about right.
So
he comes in, he is inaugurated in 93, comes in with a Democratic majority in the Senate, Democratic majority in the House. In 95, the 95 midterms, he loses both. This is the first time since 1954 at this point, the Republicans have had majorities in both the House and the Senate, right? So he's the president for 8 years. He goes out, we get W, right? W comes in, does his thing. We all remember that.
Yeah, we do.
Remember me? Like that was the time when like there were probably WMDs in Iraq, and who knows? We were all listening to the same info, and it could have been anything, right?
Yeah. Well, there's no proof for the WMDs except for like a couple of pictures they had where they would like circle a building, basically.
Right. But now, like half of the Democrats who voted to go into war in Iraq over that shit are like, well, I don't know. The information at the time said we had WMDs and blah blah blah.
Right,
anyway, I'm getting sidetracked on that shit.
There's a great episode of the Boondocks about this, by the way. Just gotta plug that.
So
great.
Our next Democratic president is President Barack Obama, who comes in. He wins his race in 2008, is inaugurated in 2009. He comes in to his presidency with a Democratic majority in the House and a Democratic majority in the Senate.
That's what we call a mandate, folks.
Exactly. So he then the first midterm election after he's been the president with the House and the Senate, much like Bill Clinton, then loses the House. He didn't lose the Senate right away. He didn't lose the Senate until 2015, which would be the next time that the Republicans held both the House and the Senate. And then we're able to finally take the House back in 2019. And then now we're current with Joe Biden, who now is coming into his first part of his term with a majority in the House and a Democratic majority in the House and a Democratic majority in the Senate. So I don't know. I'm kind of doing a roundabout thing here, and I don't know if this is extremely clear, but we have established a pattern of Democrats winning presidential elections, coming into their presidencies with Democratic majorities in the House and the Senate, and then immediately losing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There's a million reasons we can speculate as to why that might be, right? I think like I said, I was going to get back to Clinton. Bill Clinton, in a lot of ways, is the architect, is like a neolib architect in a lot of ways that are very meaningful, right? Like Bill Clinton really introduces the idea of like a tough on crime Democrat, who's like he really sells this whole idea of like, no, like what wins the Democrats elections is to actually be more like Republicans. Like that is the strategy that we need to follow if we are going to be successful in politics, right?
Right. Basically, it takes the page out of the Republicans' book to animate white racial animus, right?
Right.
Yeah. And weaponize it.
Right, which he did. I mean, Bill Clinton famously did it by being, like the tough on crime candidate. He signed a bunch of like super harsh criminal justice laws into being. One of them, the 1994 crime bill authored by our current president, Mr. Joe Biden, was signed by then President Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was also like enthusiastically for capital punishment, which would later become somewhat less chic to his fellow Democrats. But when he was running, that's what he ran on.
In the piece you wrote at Voices, you sort of lay down a theme of here's what Democrats don't do is they don't do anything to improve the material standing of the people at large. Not only that, like they actively harm particular populations in the Clinton era.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and like the Democrats are very good, and like the crime stuff is like is indefensible. Like there's nothing that's pretty cut and dry as far as I'm concerned, is just being like straight up bad and reprehensible. But like a different version of this, right? Like a different version of the Democrats not doing a thing when they have the chance is when Obama comes in with his mandate, wants to do the ACA, which, if you'll remember, was floated at first as being like, everybody will have health care. This is the first step. Like, we want universal health care, but this is the first step to get there. It's an incremental process, and this is the first step of that incremental process, right? Which seems hilarious today by like the way that mainstream Democrats talk about Medicare for all, or like universal health care in general, right? It's like they've completely given up on that now. But back when when Obama was first floating that, that's how he floated it. Right. And then he did what the Democrats are doing now, which is they kicked back and forth this idea of like, okay, here's what we want for like health insurance reform. They watered it down amongst themselves. The Democrats all compromised amongst themselves while by the way, they have a mandate. They have a majority in both of these houses. Right. And what comes out is the ACA, Obamacare, which isn't all bad, right? Like there are definitely like a lot of people, especially a lot of folks in like really tenuous financial situations, see a lot of benefit from this, right? But so many other people take a huge hit on it. And like really what it is it's just like a different way for Democrats to funnel money from their constituents into the pockets of health insurance providers, right? And in this time, at the time, you have to do it or you get fined by the IRS. So like the optics are terrible. Like obviously everybody wants everybody to have health care, right? But like it just makes this like huge easy target for the Republicans to be like, dude, this guy's costing you all this money, like for what? Like what do you know what your insurance premiums just went up to like $800 a month because you have a family of 3. Or you're a family of 4, like, which they had to have been able to see coming. And then of course then he is punished by losing the House and the Senate as the tenure of his presidency goes on, which he didn't have to do. Right. I mean, and I think that is the thing. They didn't have to water it down like that. They didn't have to make it a bailout. They didn't have to make it like a huge payday for the insurance companies, but they did it because that's how the Democrats do it. And they do it by giving you a little bit, because it is good. It is good that like poor folks have access to healthcare they didn't have before. That's objectively good, right? And that's how they get away with it. Is there's like these little. I heard this great quote today, actually, where they were talking about how they refer to this as the Democrats giving you it's half a loaf politics, where they're like, look, we don't want to give you you can't have a whole loaf, but you can have half a loaf, and that's better than no loaf, right? And so all we get is a half a loaf. And this great quote, I wish I could remember who said this because it is great. And I wish I could attribute it, but it was something along the lines of like a half a loaf is just enough to spoil your appetite for the full meal that you actually need. Like if we spend all of our time eating a half a loaf here and there, we never actually sit down and eat a meal at the table, right? Which I think is a fairly apt metaphor for the legislative process that the Democrats have.
Is there, and I don't fully know this argument on one side or the other, but I've heard people say, Obama was the first Black president ever, and there are arguments that he had to moderate himself in some ways because of the racist environment of the U.S. at that time. Can anyone speak to that on the show?
Anyone other? Yeah. You want to take that?
I mean, I think to a certain extent that's certainly true, right? I mean, it's something that I think all, especially Black politicians, are aware of is the idea that you are going to be viewed as being less objective, whatever that is supposed to mean in the context, when you bring up certain things, that you are going to be judged more harshly for having the same views as, you know, your white colleagues. Like, that's a thing, right? Like, Obama said something pretty benign, I think, that he got a lot of flack for, which is saying that Trayvon Martin looks like he could be his kid. I mean, to me, it's as close to a fact as you can get with something that's like subjective like that. But like, look at him. He looks like he could be a sibling to Sasha and Malia. Like that seems like a reasonable thing to say in the aftermath of somebody dying. And yet he was given grief about that not being objective enough. Right. And so I think there are times, you know, where he did have to moderate, where he did have to. I mean, one of the biggest critiques that you know, I know a lot of people in Black community say is like, well, what did he do specifically for Black people? And you can point out like, well, the Affordable Care Act and this, that, and the other. And it's like, yeah, that was for everyone. But there is a debt that's owed to Black people. And like, what did he do specifically to champion some of the needs of a group of people who have really experienced the bottom of the barrel in terms of conditions and in terms of treatment, you know, over time? And he was in office for 8 years. And the answer to that is there wasn't really a specific agenda that he had to be able to address things. And he did a lot for a lot of communities, right? But there wasn't one. So I think that I think that had he been potentially a non-Black politician, he might have caught a lot more flack for that than he did also. So I think it kind of cuts both ways, and that I think Black people gave him a pass at times when maybe, you know, we shouldn't have, because we were excited to see him in that role and wanted to see him succeed. And I think also at the same time, he was judged much more harshly than his colleagues were for doing some of the same things and wanting some of the same things that you know, they would have pushed if it were their agenda.
I think all of that is fair to say. I think another thing that, while we're on this topic, is like, maybe a hot take, I don't know, but if you look at like, not just, and I like, this is a broad sweeping thing, but not just the fact that Obama is like a hardcore proponent of capitalism, like the awful, icky, terrible capitalism that, like, you know, turns many of us, you know, I don't know, like, whatever. He's a terrible capitalist. He's also a huge proponent of law enforcement. He was involved in like 19 different like imperialist U.S. actions overseas. You know what I mean? Like this is a guy. I think another thing that people don't like to think about, but if you think about things like law enforcement and like being involved in like U.S. imperialist actions overseas as being like forces of white supremacy, Obama was kind of bad with being like at the very, very least, sympathetic to white supremacy as a concept. And at worst was like one of the worst proponents of white supremacy that we have seen in this country in a very long time.
Yeah,
I'm here to be disagreed with if there's like dissent about that statement.
No, I do have a question regarding who he ran as, and then, you know, sort of how he governed once he had won office. Because I think what's interesting about Obama is that he ran as a populist. He was unafraid to, and I say this as a person who feels that, you know, populist politicians can be very, very great people, or they can be very, very terrible people, like a Trump, right? But he ran on a sort of a populist tack in his first run in 2008, and then he just pulled way, 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 way back. And Skyler, you sent us some reading in prep for this episode discussing the notion of populism and how the left needs to reject the vilification of the populist on the left. And I was really interested by that. And like, I guess my first question to you is, in the last 100 years, who is the most successful Democratic president and why? Which is another article you sent us.
I mean, I think it's easy to point to FDR in this conversation, right? And be like, I mean, because this guy got a ton of shit done. And this was somebody who, like, FDR was not worried when it became time. And I think what it was that FDR allowed himself to be pushed by the left. And FDR was actually somebody who could be moved to the left. But when it came time for like him to want to do like the New Deal, when people were like, because every time there's been anybody trying to do anything that actually like brings progress around, right? Both sides of the aisle start yelling about socialism because like it's easy to red bait in this country and it just shuts the conversation down, and Democrats are terrified of it. So if that word comes within 100 miles of anything, regardless of whether it's a good idea or not, they just throw their hands up and back down, right? That's not how FDR's kind of, as I understand it, his attitude towards that was more like, fuck it. Like, I don't give a shit. Call me a socialist. Like, let's go. Like, we're doing the New Deal. I'm in doing the Social Security. I'm doing all of these things, right? I mean, I think it wasn't him who brought in, no, that would have been, I get him mixed up sometimes with other ancient presidents who were president before I was born. But I mean, I would say FDR, right? Like, we're still like, he got so much done. It was a time for the working class that we've never been back to, right? Like, I mean, we come out of that with this like giant boom where like people can work in a factory and like buy a house, right?
Yeah, that's what's interesting to me. And like, there's an economics professor who sort of argues that FDR was not originally a labor guy, a populist in that regard, but they pushed them, they gained their power, people organized, right? The Communist Party had like some sway back then. The labor unions had a lot of sway back then. And they said, hey man, we should do this New Deal thing. And he did it. And I won't pretend to know what was in FDR's mind at the time, but once he saw success from that, I think, to your point, Skyler, he started saying like, oh, I'm riding this wave of all these people, and it doesn't matter what the corporations say to me. It doesn't matter what they try and make me do, because these folks behind me are so much more powerful than those corporations. And I think like a true politician, it's like, you want to feel like you're successful. You want to maintain your office. And he did both of those things, as you said in the piece you wrote, for 4 terms,
Right. Well, the other thing that it did, it's not just that it was good for labor, that it was good for like FDR feeling good about his legacy or whatever, but it was also good for the Democratic Party, right? The Democratic Party following FDR, like, and following like as well as the country are doing under that leadership, the Democrats start winning elections left and right. It was a great time to run basically in any election as a Democrat, because people were turning up to vote for it because they had something to vote for, right?
Because their lives were improving.
Right. And now, we fast forward to where we're at now, and it's a completely different situation. And I think, like, I don't know. I think I yell about this so much because I want people to at least try and imagine a version of this country that's better. That's much, much better. Right. Things like Medicare for all, especially things like a $15 minimum wage that we've just been told is like not doable or whatever. That's not radical. That's not a progressive. $15 minimum wage is a fucking insult. Minimum wage should be like $25 in this country. The fact that we can't have $15 is not only an insult, but it is a sign that your elected leaders like are not afraid
actively not afraid
of the people who live here, right?
Yeah,
because it is that's criminal. The fact that not only is that the proposed idea, but that it's not enough. But those things aren't radical. And the fact that like even the Democrats who are supposed to be on the left side of the spectrum in this country treat them as if they are radical, and then like invent new ways constantly, like this parliamentarian thing to be like, oh, well, we wanted to do it, but we couldn't do it because the parliamentarian said, we could. Like, what the fuck is that? Do you think that a Republican president who has Republican majorities in the House and the Senate is going to let the parliamentarian tell him he can't do a thing he wants to do?
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of brings me to the crux of this thing, which is like, why do the Democrats do this? Why do the Democrats lose Congress, like the entire Congress, every time that they become the president? And the question that I like have for you guys is, do you think it's an accident? Like, do you think they're dumb and they just don't get it? Or do you think it is by design? Do you think that the Democrats intentionally lose so that they don't have to do anything for the working class or people who need them to really, really, really need them to lead in a way that improves their quality of life?
I think that they're just marginally better than the Republicans, right? Like, it's one of those things where, like, when you have a party that has decided to double down on the social issues, all you have to do is like kind of get that right. And then people go, oh, that's better, right? Because we live in a two-party system. So there's only two major choices, right? And so it's like, do you want to be the party that's like trying to kick trans people out of the military, or do you want to be in the other like, it doesn't feel like much of a choice.
That wants trans people fighting wars in
your war is over. Like,
right.
Like it doesn't feel like much of a choice, but I guess I want the I guess I want to be with the party that just isn't like also actively like stabbing people in the back and vilifying their identities, I guess, or like, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like, yes, this is a place where I want to be because my values are encapsulated in their, their pillars and their talking points, and I can ride with you. It's just like, yeah, that looks pretty terrible, and you're kind of wanting to do the same things, but you're also like, like it's the social issues that really honestly are the only difference between the two parties. And that's barely, I mean, it's a name only, and sometimes because then you end up in a situation where, like, to your point, we're going to send trans people off to fight wars to harm other poor people, right? Or we're going to, like, we're not really interested in doing right by people. We're just going to, like, not actively be jerks about it.
Yeah.
I think it is important while we're on that topic, too, to, like, make space and really, like, state that it is, like, again, like the ACA thing, it is objectively good that, like, trans folks have like better, like more rights and access to a better quality of life under a Democrat than they don't under a Republican. Like, that's good. And that is like, that is worth a lot, it's not. And it, like when people, yell about identity politics or whatever, I think that does tend to get lost in the mix. And I think it's worth stating that like those differences do matter heavily.
If I were to answer your question, I think that there are some Democrats that are dumb and are like, wow, why is this so hard? Why is it so hard to maintain a majority? And that there are others that are basically like capitalist shills that are like, this is going precisely as planned. I view it in that regard. I do have a silver lining in my head that is, like as we're doing in California, you defeat the Republicans, the evil far right party, and then you can start fighting the Democrats, which we're starting to do in California. I think with the Democrats getting rid of the filibuster as they're trying to do, if they do that, they're having active hearings on making DC the 51st state. If they do that, these are the steps forward to neutralize a Republican Party that's already dying. It's already going to die. It's all old white men at this point. It really is. And demographically,
you talking statewide or nationally?
National at this point.
I disagree with that heavily. I think that is an extremely optimistic way to look at the Republican Party.
No, by numbers, it's still shrinking. Yes, there are definitely young Republicans, definitely, but by numbers, if you look at it like in that way, like there are just so many fewer of them.
But the numbers don't matter if Democrats don't show up and vote, right? Like Republicans vote.
Well, we need people to vote. So we need to get rid of basically the voter suppression laws that Republicans are actively trying to pass right now, which is precisely because they know that their party is dying. So the only way they know that they can maintain power is by minority rule. I do think that, to your point, and you've been arguing this for a long time, we should just get rid of the Senate because it's a racist
yeah, why do we have the Senate? Like think for 3 seconds about why the Senate exists and like what it gets used for and like what are we doing here?
There's no reason.
Toss it out, huck it out. We don't need it.
A random person in Wyoming should have 80 times the power that I do because there are just 1/80th of the people who live in that state. It just makes no sense.
Yeah. I think we're like kind of, it looks, I could talk about this all night, but I think we're kind of at our time.
I think I'm with you on that, but provided, on the, like, what role does the Senate play? It was supposed to sort of balance out the smaller states, but I think the states are the states are arbitrarily defined anyway. So I think that creates challenges. What upsets me more though is that like a place like Wyoming gets one representative in the House of Reps and they only have like 540,000 people, but there's no single congressional district in California that has fewer than 1 million people. So even in the House, Wyoming is getting essentially twice the representation of a Californian, and that's where I have an issue with. So I would have actually rather standardize it to whatever the smallest state is. And so if the smallest state is 540,000 people, then every 540,000 people you have, you get an extra representative, because otherwise you end up in this weird place where even in the place that's supposed to be balanced by population, the smaller states are also still.
But this could be done in addition to abolishing the Senate, right? Like you're talking about like further reform on the House.
The Senate is a zillion times worse.
Right. But I'm saying it's also imbalanced in the place that's supposed to be counterbalancing that, right? So like it's in the same way that
counterbalance it. Like the Senate is by definition not democratic. It just shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Like and the rest of it, like I totally agree with you on that too. And you're right. The state lines are arbitrary. And I'm sorry, Skyler, we're taking us over. But
no, that's all right. That's all good. I'm always down to do this.
I also want a constitutional convention. So I think we could, like, I haven't even gotten into like get rid of the Senate. I'm just like, let's go back to the Constitution and let's rethink this whole thing. Because I'm of the belief that no system that was created when only landowning white men over the age of 21 could develop it is without the need of maybe just revisiting and just questioning everything. Like,
this isn't a future episode. I want you and Skyler to hold a constitutional convention on the show.
Let's do it.
About the Justice League.
Oh God. Oh God.
Yeah. The executive branch will be the mother box.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Oh, no one laughs when I fucking say it. Okay.
I don't find the mother box funny.
Yeah, we can tell. We know. You've made that very clear.
We can see the look on your face when mother box comes up.
Doing a thing, and it wasn't that thing, and now it's ruined. Whatever.
I can't believe you didn't think it was the thing before, is what I'm saying.
Yep.
They weren't doing that thing, but now it has become that thing. Whatever. I hate you all. I hate it here.
We love you so much.
Welcome back.
Do not recommend.
Dave, speaking of doing a thing, what's going on at voicesrivercity.com? Tell me all about that.
Great question. We have things that we do. We've been publishing the podcast there, of course. We also have been starting up again on community essays. So if you're a listener, if you are somebody who wants to speak truth to power, please reach out to us, kempa@voicesrivercity.com, or just find any one of us on Twitter. We are running the Sack Follows the Money project. More to actually go on there. If you're vaccinated in the future, down the line, a few months from now, I'm going to start holding classes for folks on how to do Sack Follows the Money work, because I want to empower people to get to know how to navigate the space of who's taking money from whom, right? But other than that, we are on Facebook, Voices River City, Twitter and Instagram at Voices River City. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/Voices River City. You'll get double the episodes. So that gives you a Friday episode as well, for as little as $5 a month. That's $1 per extra episode. It's fun.
We get real wily on those episodes too.
We do get, you think we're bad now. It's a lot of fun.
Especially now that we can't no curse Mondays, Tuesdays equals.
You heard how much we swore here, how many like augas Mickey had to put in on this one. Imagine how much we're swearing on Fridays. So yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. And yeah, just thank you so much for those of you who are supporting us. There are no words for it. I am on Twitter at Kempa, YOUKNOWKEMPA.
You can get all my takes about the Justice League and other subjects by following me at Guillotine for You. That is Guillotine, the number 4, YOU.
I'm on the Twitter at Shan ND Stevens. I just totally froze. Had no idea what was happening. I was still thinking about Skyler's question from earlier.
And you were thinking about my little sketch, huh?
I was thinking about Kempa's sketch, and my brain it completely froze. Anyway, that's where I'm at on the Twitters.
And you can find me at Flojaune, FLOJAUNE.
That's it. That's the show. Thank you for listening. We will see you next time. Until then, it is important to us that you understand and know that we love you very much, and we want you to stay safe.
Stay sane.
Stay healthy.
And get that jab in your arm before you hang out with me.
Get that jab in your arm. There's a vaccine clinic for people experiencing homelessness this Thursday at 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m.
We're still recording? Is that good?